First thing I need to mention is something that I probably should have talked about earlier, and that is null. Let's say I make an array of strings, and then I print out str's 0. Now I get a null. This thing null is what you get for a variable that hasn't been set. It just means like this reference doesn't refer to anything. So you can't set int equal to null, but you can do things like string s equals null, or you can do scanner something equals null. Now if I try to do something with this, like if I try to say string.length, I will get an exception. The exception right here, java.length.null pointer exception. So if you've ever seen this, it means you're trying to use a reference that hasn't been set to anything. To kind of go back to that object boxing thing that we talked about, if I did string s equals hello, that's going to create this box with the text hello in it, and then s is going to point to that. So that's really referring over here. And when I say s.length, what I'm saying is go to the thing that s refers to and get its length. If s is set to null, it's not pointing to anything. So when I do s.length, it can't find the length, and it gives me an exception. So this actually is a runtime error, and I can show you that it's a runtime error, and it's not something I can catch earlier if I print something before it. So let me change this back to null. So if I say hello world, and then I try to print the length, I'll still see hello world get printed out here, but then on the next line it fails. So if you create an array of object types, if you create an array of strings, the default value is going to be null. You want to avoid having nulls in your program as much as you reasonably can. That's something to be aware of. If you have something that hasn't been set, it will be this null. And if you want to unset something or have it refer to nothing, you assign null to it. This isn't true for primitives. If you create an array of ints, they're all going to be zeros. If you create an array of any primitive, it's going to be the zero initialization kind of thing. But for object type, like string, student, card, whatever, they're going to start at null. If you just try to print out null itself, you will print out null, but you can't do anything with it. The real topic for today is going to be two-dimensional arrays. We have one-dimensional arrays already. Everything we've been using up till now we referred to as one-dimensional or single-dimensional. It's just one row of objects, and you index into it and you get something out. A two-dimensional array is something you will need if you want to have something like a matrix. So many of you are doing games. Many of you have games that have boards, Minesweeper, Connect 4, things like that. It's not just a straight line of these things. It goes this way and it goes this way. So a two-dimensional array, Tetris, any two-dimensional game basically is going to be arranged as this array where you have like the row and the column or XY plane. Another way to think about a two-dimensional array is that it is an array of arrays. If I were to declare an array of ints, it would be int brackets array, and then equals new whatever. So remember the syntax here. Brackets means array of, and it's an array of the thing to the left. So if I wanted a two-dimensional array, I would say that I want an array of arrays of ints. So an array of int. To highlight it, the first two brackets you read as an array of this whole thing, an array of ints. Enough talking about it. Let me show you how one would look. So let me call this matrix. This will actually have multiple arrays inside of the braces. So you can say brace and then another brace, 7, 5, 20, then a comma. Do this to make it easier to look at, 10, 6, and 3. So the dimensions of this are there's 2 rows and there's 3 columns. And you can write the numbers that correspond to each one of these. So this is row 0, this is row 1, 0 and 1 right there. This is element 0, 1, 2. So again, we start counting from the top left and we work our way up as we go to the right, we work our way up as we go down. So if I wanted to access this 5, for example, the way I would get to it would be by doing matrix followed by the row first, and we see the 5 is in row 0. Column number is going to be 1, and that 5 gets printed out. So 0 specifies which of these 2 rows I want to go to, the whole thing, and then the 1 is telling me this is the column I want to get to. So if I draw this out more in like this kind of grid shape, I'll have 7, 5, 20, then 10, 6, and 3. There's a row 0 and 1, and then 0, 1, 2 this way. If I asked you, how could I print out the 3? What would I have to change inside of those brackets to make the 3 print out? This will be a 1 and a 2. They go down to row number 1, and then they go over to 0, 1, 2, and that's how we get the 3. I'm going to call out an element up here, and I'm going to ask you what I should write in order to get that element to get printed out. If I wanted to print out the 20, can someone tell me how I get that element? It's going to be 0, 2. Right, and if I wanted to get the 10, 1 and 0. 1 down and then 0 here, so 1 comma 0. Let's say I expand this a little bit. I fill in a few more. So the reason that there's braces inside of the braces, again, I have a brace here to open the whole thing, and then there's a brace here to close the whole thing. But each element of the matrix is itself an array. So this here specifies an array of ints. So the first thing in this matrix is this array, and the next thing is this array, and the next thing is this array, and the next thing is that array. So I'm going to give you some values I want to print out here. I want you guys to write code that prints out the elements in this order. So actually, let me share link this just so we don't have to worry about copying the matrix itself down. Row 1, column 1. Row 1, column row 2, column 2, row 3, column 0, row 0, column 2, row 3, column 2, row 3, column 3. Since the elements of this array are themselves arrays, if I wanted a variable that just referred to that first row, I could say int row equals matrix 0. Because the type of matrix 0 is an array of ints. So who could tell me what this should print? Row equals matrix 0, which makes it refer to this whole row. So row is now pointing here. So then when I say row 2 down here, it's this one, 2, which is going to be 20. So it's just more to stress that the type of what's inside of the array is just another array. Here, if I do matrix 2, 1, what is that going to print? 13, correct. We go to row 2 here. 1 is 13. If I change this to be 3, 2, what's this going to print? 12 it is. If I change this to 3, 5. What will this print now? Array index out of bounds error. I got an out of bounds there. If I change this to be like 10, I'll also get out of bounds. So if you go out of bounds on either of these, you'll get an array index out of bounds exception. 1, 2, 3. What about 3, 2? That is actually 12. 2, 3. 42 is correct. Next exercise, I'm going to draw one up here, and I just want you to write it in code so you can get the hang of writing all these braces in order and all that stuff. You can change the original one if you like, or you can make a second one. Just don't use the same variable name twice. So if I wanted to print out all the elements of this matrix in order usually being the rows first, so 10, 30, 42, 67, 100, basically the way you would read it as I just did, or the way you would type it in. The way that would look is matrix 0, 0, and then we'd have a 1 here, and then a 2 here, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that should be the whole first row. Right, and after we're done with the first row, we would just do the same thing here. Instead of 0, we would do it with 1s. So instead of 0 here, we have 1 here. And then if you want to do it with 2s, you would have this whole thing here, but with 2s. So it's a lot of typing, right? Like when I had an array and we started out, we manually indexed the whole array. What could we do instead of manually indexing? Use a for loop, right? So if I want to look at each row of the array, what I could do is for int I equals 0, I is less than matrix.length plus I. Now that'll give me the row number, and then I can print out each element inside the row. Instead of using 0 here, I can use I. I will get every element because I'm going from I equals 0, I is less than the length of the matrix. So the length of the matrix is going to be the number of inner ones. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, and then it'll stop at 3. So the length of this first one, again, because it's an array of arrays, the number of arrays inside of this first array is 3. So we'll get I equals 0, I equals 1, I equals 2. But this is also repetitive. This is also a lot of typing. And this also requires me to know the length of the inner arrays. You could use a nested for loop instead. So what I'd like you guys to try to do is figure out how to use a nested loop to print out all the elements. And we'll spend a little bit of time on that. Keep in mind that matrix I or matrix 0, you can have a dot length after that. If I wanted to know how many elements were in that first one, inner length plus matrix 0 dot length. So I see inner length equals 6 up top from this line here. So what I want to get is some kind of setup where I can have another for loop with an int j, and that be my column number. So I'd have ij here. So what we're trying to do is figure out what these question marks should actually be. The outer loop, again, the outer loop is something we want to run once for each row. We want to have a loop inside of it that does everything for each column. So we come around the outer one first. The outer one, first row, second row, third row. But on each one of those rows, we have to look at each element in it. What might help is, again, if you can realize that you can write code like this, specify that row, because at that point, it's just a matter of iterating through the row array. The row now will be the current row. So if I wanted to iterate over a row, if I just have a simple array, and I want to look at each element in the array. That's all this inner loop has come down to now. I can't use I, so the only difference here is I have to use j. So I say int j equals 0, j is less than row.length plus j, and then print out row j with a semicolon, of course, and I'll get the elements in order. So this part right here, we've done this a million times. We're just looking at each element in an array, where row now is the array. Row refers to the first row, then the second row, then the third row. But to put that into more of a matrixy way to do it, instead of having this row variable, I can just use that matrix I directly here. So matrix I dot length, and instead of row j, I do matrix I j. And now I have my nested loop that can look at everything in the matrix. How do I find the largest element in the matrix? How might you do that? You know how to do it for a single row, because we've done that a bunch of times, right? You set your largest variable before the loop, and then you look over everything. Now what you want is the largest variable, but you have a nested loop. So how much needs to change here, really? Try to just write code up here. So if I want there to be an int largest, set it equal to something. I don't know what yet. So that down here, if I do system.out.println largest, I get the largest number in the array. The largest number in the whole thing. So in this case, it would be that 667. You always just keep track of that one variable. Whenever you find one that's bigger than one you've seen before, you replace the one you keep track of, because that's your new largest. You want to initialize largest to be the first element, as we usually do, instead of question mark. I can't just do matrix 0 here, because matrix 0 isn't an int, but I can do matrix 0, 0. That's how we can assume that the first element is the largest. Now in here, the idea is still similar. It's exactly the same thing. If matrix ij is greater than the largest, that is the new largest. So largest equals matrix ij. And we see largest equals 667, which is the largest element in the matrix. The steps here aren't anything that crazy different from what we do with a regular array. We just need to look one dimension deeper. A lot of this stuff with 2D arrays is going to be you trying to set things and then you printing out the whole thing and seeing what's inside of it. So this is generally how you want to format it if you're initializing it with stuff. You could put it all on one line. You could do this and it's the same thing. Java doesn't care about the white space. Formatting it that way makes it easier to see what's up. If you want to assign elements of the matrix, this is how you would do it as well. You would say matrix ij equals something. So I can say matrix, let me delete this largest stuff. Ij equals, and I could set every number to 0 if I wanted to. And I would zero out the entire array or set everything to -1. Same kind of rules for assignment. Nothing's gonna get printed because I'm not printing anything. Now the matrix has all -1s. Like with regular arrays, if you just want to look at things or if you're using object references, you can do this. As long as you're not assigning, you can use a for each loop. And the way that would work, for int brackets row colon matrix, that's the type of each row. So for each row, we want to get each element of the row. So here I've got a little for each loop to look at everything. So if you had objects, you can like modify the objects this way, but you can't assign to an array location. So as long as you're not trying to do e equals something else, this is fine. It's each element. So the row here will first refer to the whole first row. So that row is itself an array. And then I'm saying for each element e of that row. The way this will go is we'll have row points to this first thing here, and then we'll have e is 10, then e is 30, then 42, then e equals 67 for each one of these. That's the inner loop. We're printing them out each one as we go. Exit the inner loop. Takes us back to the top of this loop, and we advance row to be the second row now. And then E is going to be, for each E in that row, 17, then 21, then 28, so on. I want to show how to create a matrix without elements in it. So let's say you wanted a matrix. You just know I want something that's like 5 rows of 10 elements each. The way you can do that is to use the new operator. So int brackets, brackets again, matrix 2 equals new int 5, 10. So that will be 5 rows of 10 elements. So this is probably more relevant for you than a lot of these things. And then you would have to walk through it and initialize them all. Because if I do this, they'll all be initialized to 0. But if, for example, I said string here instead, if I did this here where I printed out each element, I'm going to get null for everything if I change this matrix here to matrix 2. A whole lot of nulls because they haven't been set to anything, so you would need to walk through and initialize everything. Let me modify this loop at least to print this a little bit better. So I should just have all the ints being printed in order now. If I want to format this more nicely, what I can do is instead of print line here, I can just use print. So I'll print the element and then a space, and then at the bottom of each loop I'll print a new line, and I get them printed that way instead. And if I want to format them more nicely, I think a tab character might actually be what I want. So I use that tab to like bring it up to the next tab stop, which accounts for things with different digits to a certain extent anyway. So this print line changed to a print. And then here I print line the new line. So in the inner loop, it's going to print the element and a tab, an element, tab, element, tab. And then at the end of the inner loop, I print a new line character. So these all end up on the same line, then a new line. And for displaying things like your Minesweeper boards, like your Connect 4, like your chessboard, like your checkers board, this is kind of what you want to do if you're doing a text-based. Print everything on one line and then the next thing on the next line. So that's all my numbers. If I were to do a similar thing here for strings, what I would want to do to initialize this whole thing, matrix 2, is I would have to actually start them as something. I would have to walk through the whole thing and set them. So any object is going to be true for. Matrix 2 ij equals, I can do even empty string, or I'll just set them all to x to start. If I repeat this style of loop below there, I'm just setting them all to x. So I'll change this to string, I'll change that to string, I'll change this to matrix 2. I should see a lot of x's being printed out, 5 by 10 thing of x's, instead of just nulls. Whereas if I don't initialize them, all the strings will be null instead. And usually it's not what you want. So I'm kind of bouncing around between different things up here. And then I'll hit share np07/0. So if I wanted to do a tic-tac-toe board, what I could initialize this to, instead of int, I'll do a char brackets brackets, board equals new char 3 by 3. And then I'll go through and I'll initialize all the characters to space characters. And be very careful with these because you will eventually type an I instead of a J somewhere on this line or somewhere down here, and you will get some array index out of bounds error. It'll take you a little bit to figure out, but just always be looking for that mistake. I will set board I J equal to a space. I'll run that. I'll make sure that works. Now displaying the board, what I probably want to see is something like a character and then maybe a pipe to separate them, and then if there's nothing there, just a space. So a space and then maybe an O here, not override, just O. And then there can be an O here, an O here, an X here, X, pipe, O, pipe, X. So this is the display I want to get to. Something like this when I print out the board. So I'll put that into its own function, public static void print board, which takes that array, takes that whole matrix board, and in here we want to print it out. So for int I equals 0, I is less than board.length plus plus I. I just copy these two lines because it's exact same thing. Inside of here, I'm going to print the current character, which will be board IJ, and I will append this pipe character to it. And then at the end of each one, I will print a new line followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those dashes. I don't know why I wrote another 4 there. That definitely was a mistake. So let's see. If I do print board right here, I already know this is not going to be right, but I want to see what I get. Unclosed comment. That's not what I was expecting. What I would want here is just to be the tic-tac-toe board with all spaces in it. Can anyone tell me why this is printing out extra stuff? Because I've got a 3 extra here and I've got an extra one down here. So I'm printing out each character followed by one of these things. So what I want to do to format this more nicely is just print the board I and then say if j is not equal board I dot length minus 1. Meaning it's not the last character, then I'll print out that pipe. And then down at the bottom, I have to do basically the same thing. First, I'm going to do a print line, get that new line character, and then if I is not equal to board.length minus 1, then I'm going to print out these dashes. But this is how I can start, and then I'll fill these in with X's and Y's as I go. So now I just have my function up here that's going to print the board. I'm just trying to give you some example of like a real use of a matrix and just seeing the things that come up as I go. So I put my main up top. So what I'll do now is I'll create a scanner to read from the user, import java.util.scanner. First thing I can maybe do is just set board 0, 0 to an X, and then try printing the board instead and see if I get the kind of thing I'm expecting, which I do. I'll create a scanner here, scanner keyboard equals new, scanner system.in. I'll do for int I equals 0, I is less than, really it's gonna be 9. So it'll be board.length times board0.length, the length of the whole board and then the length of each row, the number of this way and the number of that way, and then I'll do a plus plus I here. So really all I'm trying to do inside of here is go until the board is totally full. Later you would ideally be checking and seeing are any of these rows complete or are they not. Right now I'm just gonna go until the board is full. So we need to switch between X's and O's, and one simple way to do that would just be to say char current equals and then check if I'm on an even play or an odd play. So if I mod 2 is equal to 0, that means it's an X. Otherwise it's going to be an O. Now we're going to ask the user for position. System.out.println, enter row and column, and then we'll read in the row from the keyboard. So keyboard.nextInt. We'll read in the column from the keyboard, keyboard.nextInt, and then we will assign to that location on the board. Now, add more logic later, not let them overwrite each other, but for now we'll say board row column equals the current character, and then we will call print board. So let's say I do 0, 0, I get an X there. I'll say 2, 1, and I get an O down there. And this will just go 9 times. So I've written a tic-tac-toe game. There's a few errors right now. I'll kind of just restart this game to demonstrate what they are before I share it. If I do 0, 0 here, puts an X there, it's also going to let me overwrite that X with an O by entering the same thing twice. So there's no checking. For that, you need to check what's the current character. If it's not a space, then don't let them write there. Another one would be, I'm not actually checking what they input. So if I say row 5 and column 10, it's going to throw an exception. So we're not validating the user input. So I would say to do, make sure row and column are in bounds. And then another one would be, and then to do, make sure place they selected is empty. You can use another while loop around this or something. You could have a loop inside of a loop. See you all tomorrow.